morning. We are back talking about East Asian international management, specifically talking about Chinese business management. So when we're talking about Guanxi, some people say it's just Chinese, Chinese, Chinese. I want to clarify that it's not. Thomas, you must understand you need Guanxi. When you're trying to be successful or get promotions or be very powerful, Guanxi, in my opinion, is needed anywhere in the world, everywhere in the world. One of the reasons why almost everything I do, I am not just putting my name on the teaching slides, but I'm also putting the name of Hua and Cliff and Duang here today with us. Try to help always promote other people around you. And I want to check you are aware of the importance of Guanxi, and then the idea of why the overseas Chinese became so incredibly powerful. We talked about the art of war. That should be clear. That's basically directions for doing business anywhere. And then Guanxi, how you can work with other people, and then the history of them. Are you aware of some of those details, Thomas? Would you like to try
Yes.
to summarize what you think are the most important points of each?
Well, I would say that with Guanxi, that it is about making connections and basically like doing favors for people. And it started in China, but it is happening all around the world.
There are other, perhaps less important things, but there are issues related to the Chinese culture you might be interested in learning. For example, the Chinese background, like the relationships. Are you aware of the relationships of Confucianism? How there are a certain number of relationships that Chinese people generally have to follow, like an older person has to have a certain relationship with the younger person.
I had honestly no idea about it. I know that in many like Asian cultures, they have to be more polite.
It's not just a polite though. It actually, let me try to go back and explain some of these things quite quickly. The idea that the exchange of favors is part of their history, part of their culture, part of like you were supposed to be polite to your mom and dad. You are supposed to, I don't know, wear clothes when you walk out in public. It's something that you have been raised. This is right. Everybody needs to do it. Well, supposedly the Chinese culture has the same type of thing, but they're looking at different things. For example, la or pulling, Guanxi, that efforts to establish and build relationships with others where there is no other relationship before. You're always supposed to be doing this, and you're supposed to be respecting other relationships. There's several different things and Chinese terms. For example, you can see on the slide here the Guanxi, which is the relationology most Canadians don't really have any idea about, or the Guanxi, which my Chinese isn't perfect, but there is supposed to be a difference in the sound. But it's talking about the connected individual or social organizations and how you're supposed to respect those. And then the Danwei, the work units, or even the connection of other people. One thing that I think is kind of important is when you are in Korea, when you're in Japan, when you're in East Asia, Vietnam, especially in China, understanding two parts of Guanxi relating to face. You understand face is not just your cheek, your nose, your eyes. Face is talking about your image in some sense. In Canada, we talk about image, but it's much more than that. There's two dimensions to it. So face can be classified. This is information from the textbook Asian Management Systems. Liang and Miangzi. Liang is associated with the personal behavior. So Liang is personal behavior, how you behave anywhere, anytime. But the Miangzi is something that is valuable and it can be achieved. So it's more like your status level or level of society. So a Chinese is socially criticized if you have no Liang and is deemed as unsuccessful and low status if they have no Miangzi. So you're successful or you're not successful depending on your Miangzi. But if you don't care about how you look, if you don't care about that stuff at all, if you don't have the lian, then you're just not good. That's bad. That's rude. That's you're criticized. Um, can you try to repeat that back to me? Do you understand what I'm talking about, Thomas?
Uh, yeah, I can try. So, basically, they should really care about how they seem to other people because otherwise they will not be as accepted in the society and they will be criticized by others. So I think that
Okay, so
it
what you're saying now, that is liang. Good.
Mhm.
Keep going.
And I think that maybe like where I
Miangzi.
like see it are like yeah are like movies when the like Asian kid has mother or grandmother and they are like for example in churches and the mothers are like just talking between each other about how good their son is and they are trying to kind of like beat the other one to like for the kid to
Okay.
have more
Yeah.
accomplishments.
Right. And what about the clothes the mother's wearing or the clothes the kid's wearing? You almost never see a the inside of a home of somebody in East Asia, but they will be very happy to show you what clothes they have or what bags and shoes or car they have, right? Because that stuff is public. And so, what do you usually see? Korean people, do they wear old ripped jeans? Like, I can describe, Canadians as very comfortable walking around in my grandfather's clothes. If they're old and ripped farm clothes, but if I'm comfortable in them, I'll wear them. Can you do you associate Koreans with the same way?
Uh, no, actually, like it is really interesting to me how kind of I don't want to say everyone, but like most people in here, I feel like they have really good like sense of style and they are also not kind of like overdoing it. Like if they do not know a lot about like fashion, I feel like they stick with the easy colors, like the like somehow gray, for example, or black and white, and it
Ah,
looks
that's
like
really interesting.
really really good. Meanwhile, I feel like in Europe, it's more like um, they believe in themselves that they really know how to dress, and they like go into um, really like hard combinations, like a lot of colors together, which I would say that is much harder to like look really good in it because it can be like overwhelming and stuff. So that is something that I personally really like it.
So you are looking at style. You're not really looking at Myangzi yet. What I'm talking about
Mm.
Myangzi is brand. You have known me for several weeks, many weeks, and I bet you have no idea what brand clothes I use. And probably, judging from what you said, you might not know what are the brands that are popular around you here in Korea. That idea of brands
Mhm.
is really big in Korea and even bigger related to the Guanxi. And the answer is in East Asia with the Confucian culture, you are supposed to make your family look really good. Even if you're super poor and starving, you're supposed to look very successful because that makes your family look successful. It makes your dad look successful. Your mom it looks successful, regardless of if you're starving or not. So how can you do that with this Guangxi idea? People are walking around with Louis Vuitton or Hermes or um, Prada. Yeah, you may notice those brand name, very expensive items are very popular here, maybe more popular than Europe, where they're supposed to come from. Now that I say that, does that ring a bell? Does that you understand what I'm talking about?
Yeah. I mean, I'm personally not like too much into fashion, so I'm not able to like tell when something is from certain brand if like it doesn't have the logo all over it. But I understand.
Okay, so for example, I am Canadian and I'm very happy to walk around when I'm not working in t-shirts and stuff. And today, because it's an informal class, I have a very interesting no brand name t-shirt, but my wife is Korean and absolutely she has many Louis Vuitton items. And when we toured around and when I was working in Europe, one of the first things she needed to go is go directly to the Louis Vuitton store and get, some of these bags, handbags that are much more than $1,000. It has nothing to do with if I can afford it or not. It's just that she wanted to be able to give it to her mom. She needed to give it to her friends. Um, and they're crazy expensive. It's a status symbol. I don't think people in Europe care too much about your status symbols, but the status symbol with the Guanxi is super, super important. And then how you act, and if you're polite or not, that etiquette, that's different. That's the Liangzi. Is that clarifying it a little bit more?
Yeah,
So,
I also wanted to ask if like when they are purchasing those like really expensive things,
mhm.
um, is there like is one of those reasons like the idea that like if I seem better, I will be able to like have better connections, like that it would be kind
Absolutely,
of like
yeah,
investment, like I will be
absolutely.
able to make more money and stuff.
Perfectly, absolutely. That's just one of many aspects. Guangxi is incredibly complex, but what you just said is perfectly correct. So if you just think of yourself as being an international business, international management strategist, and you're trying to bet on two different people, which person is going to be more successful? One of them appears super rich, and the other one looks like a homeless bum. Period. That's all you know. Who would you bet on to be more successful?
Uh, well, I personally, I like found out that at least in Europe, a lot of people that have those pricey things that they
I'm okay. So this is internationally, especially related. Let's tailor it related to Chinese business. No. Go ahead. Go ahead. Explain. You were growing up the same way as me, I think. I apologize for
um,
interrupting. Please continue.
um, I think that like if I could find out more about a person, I would. But if I just like have to make a decision right now, and they have the two different types of clothes, I would of course go for the person that is like better dressed.
When I grew up in the town I grew up, there were two people living around us that the whole community knew they were the wealthiest. No questions asked. One guy owned almost all of the big buildings and companies, and the other guy owned basically half of the community, all of the land and half of the community, the houses, the land, everything this other guy owned. But both of them looked like farmers. Literally, they were walking around as farmers everywhere and almost all the time. The guy that owned half of the community land and houses, he was walking around on horses sometimes. So sometimes with horse poop and stuff on him too. So he was so powerful, he didn't care about his image. And then just by chance, he happened to own so much. But that's not Guangxi. The Miangzi and in East Asia, people will definitely try to look like they have expensive clothes. They will try, usually historically, try to look like they have expensive cars. Many times, I think you might have heard, Samsung, when I came 25 years ago, they almost had a policy that you had to have the newest car, you had to have the newest cell phone. And it wasn't just to help Samsung's sales, it was to make anybody looking at a Samsung employee appear very successful. They were trying to appear to be the number one of anything they did, whether it's with image or anything. And so if we go back to Guangxi, why is Guangxi so important? It is making you look successful. And so if you have to have a relationship with two other people, to become very successful, a lot of mothers will try to get their children to marry the very rich, successful kid, right? If you're thinking about the mother trying to marry your kid, or get your daughter to marry some boy in the community, or get your boy to marry some daughter in the community, they try to have their kids marry the other person that seems very successful. And that, in some ways, is determined by their clothes, or the car they use, or their toys that they have. If it is expensive, that is the Guanxi. And why is that important? Because how do you know what is a good school versus a bad school? Well, part of it is the image and what people say. You are number one. And so if you look poor, your class accepts poor people, which means it might not be the hardest to get into. But if everybody going into your class is wearing brand name, some bags are $10,000 for bags, or the shoes could be, many thousands of dollars for just a set of shoes. That type of thing, especially when young kids are growing so fast, they only use the shoes for like 6 months and they throw them out. That image shows your class is the best, and then your school is the best, and the company you work with is the best. The car you drive shows that. The clothes you wear shows that. So next time you're walking around, especially in Seoul, because Seoul is the powerhouse of Korea, especially in the Gangnam area or the Yeouido area, which is the real business area of Korea, if you go there, you will see a lot of people wearing, or at least showing, these very expensive brand name products. And it doesn't mean they're super rich, but it's trying to make them look like that. Sometimes one bag could be $10,000 or $50,000. So that social capital ranking, it's pretty important. Some people get really upset talking about that. So I'm not saying it's for everybody.
By the way,
Your internet is cutting out. Could you try saying that again?
Do they also like borrow money because I know that, like, for example, in Europe, we borrow money to like buy a house, which is taken as kind of investment, or to buy a car. But do they also like take loans for the like pricey clothes?
Yeah, they will use credit cards. However, credit cards, we're talking generally about a developing economy or an emerging market when we're talking about China. And developing countries, emerging markets, they didn't have credit cards. Banks would not give super poor people any spare money. Usually banks try to just help the super rich people. And so credit cards are new. Lines of credit are new. Loans are kind of a new concept here. They do have them, but people don't usually talk about them. And talking about money is another thing. It's kind of rude to talk about money, which is funny because every time there's a birthday or a wedding or a holiday, a national holiday, you're supposed to give an envelope of money to somebody else. It doesn't have to be very much cash or very much money. But if you don't give money, that shows that you don't care about them, and it probably shows that you are too cheap, which means you're not successful. It is complicated. Try understanding. If you want, we can get into it more. But I just wanted to point out some of those ideas. Guanxi is important. Your image, what clothes you wear, how you take care of yourself. When I first came to East Asia 25 years ago, even the shape of my eyeglasses were controlled. Some people, some status people, were allowed to have round glasses. Other people had sort of bigger square glasses. And it was a status thing. And if you wore the wrong type of glasses, people were looking at you like you're insulting the president because you're wearing the president's style of glass, that type of thing. And it's a lot of people may not remember or understand the glasses aspect, but I recently have been in an environment, a work environment, where an office worker, somebody assisting the front office, they were working with us for a long time. They had a good salary for quite a long time, and their old car basically broke down, so they bought a new car. And it was a used car, but it was a new car for them. And they came into work the next day with this really fancy, like a Hyundai Granger. And so if you know the lowest level car in Hyundai is one thing, and a Sonata is a pretty good level car, but a Granger is above a Sonata, almost the highest you can get. And so the other deans and the vice presidents and even the president of the university, they were all looking at this young office manager and looking, hey, you're embarrassing everybody. Any dean that doesn't have that level of car, that office manager is basically giving them the middle finger. So the very next day, after all day long, every dean in the organization was talking to them. The very next day, he changed his car back to a lower level car, like an Avante. So it is still a big thing. Not for everybody, but for some people. Ranking is just one other. Like, so we've talked about Liang, we talked about Miangzi. Ranking is another thing where you have an obligation. For example, anybody in your department at a company, you have an obligation to help them. Anybody in your class, you have an obligation to help them, especially younger people. Older people that have already graduated have an obligation to help the younger people, because your whole group is supposed to be successful. And that's one of the reasons why I say, if you start doing your research project, try to work with your alumni, because anybody that is associated with our university, even if they graduated 1 year ago or graduated 10 years ago, there's this obligation. They have to still help you. They're not really allowed to say no. And if they do, start talking about how you are really plugged in to the university community. So you talk with all of the students, marketing department or public relations department. You know all those people. And if they know that you're connected like that, that's extra stress. They have to help you. You go to do a survey for them or ask for an internship. It's very hard for them to say no. So that's the ranking. And then there's the Ren, the benevolence and the humaneness. You're supposed to respect other people. The idea of what is Confucianism? Confucianism is 5 relationships. The father must take care of the son. The son must be loyal to the father, obedient to the father, unquestioning to the father. Same thing, that obedient and unquestioning. The ruler must take care of the subjects. Like the president of a country must take care of the people in the country and treat them like their children. But the citizens are not supposed to embarrass the ruler. They're supposed to respect that. That's why you don't hear many people in China or Japan or Korea traditionally complaining about the government. Same thing, the husband and wife and the older brother, younger brother. Doesn't matter who is more fit. Doesn't matter who is stronger. Doesn't matter who actually is smarter. But the older brother or the older person in school is usually supposed to take care of the younger person. If you go out for drinks or for meals, usually the older person is supposed to pay. And then the same thing just amongst friends. So that idea of the 5 relationships of Confucianism, that's kind of important. Hopefully you guys can use that. There's many things like this. They're talking about group orientations, social dependent people. The individual is capable of defining roles for himself, but you must understand how it's located in the center of a relationship. Do you remember the very first class where I was showing many different cartoon pictures of the East images versus the West image, the networks, and the boss was very big in Asia versus the boss is considered just another equal person in Western environments? That's kind of what we're talking about. And it gets a lot more complex than that. That's just the beginning. Then there's dynamic role of the self. You have the freedom to regulate yourself, but you must regulate things to reflect your classmates and reflect your university and reflect the company your dad works with, even if you're a student. If you start wearing clothing or acting in a way that doesn't reflect the level of your university, it's not just you that is involved, it's the whole class. If you'd really like to be shocked, you know I'm Canadian and I'm married to a Korean lady. I have 4 kids. I have taken my kids on some vacations that I used to dream of when I was young. Not very often, but sometimes I'm able to take them back to Canada and tour North America, and we see all the great things. And when I had taken my kids in the middle of this vacation that I was super proud I was able to arrange, and my kids and everybody is super, super happy, I'm asking my kids, you know, how do you like your vacation? And they start showing sadness. And I was like, what the heck is going on? And so I changed the question and I asked the question that, where do you want to go next? Would you like to have a vacation like this again? When would you like to have another vacation like this again? And I was expecting, in my mind, they're supposed to say they want to keep living on this vacation forever. They want to have this all the time. I'm just going to tell you their answer. Their answer is saying that no, they didn't want to have another one like this. Thomas, can you have any guess about why?
Not really.
What was I just saying about the image of a student? And now understand that my kids, all of my kids, were going to schools in Korea. How do Korean people study? Did you watch that 2 million minutes? How much do Korean students study?
A lot.
A lot, non-stop. And that was my kids' answer. My kids didn't want to have this vacation continuing, and they didn't want to have more vacations like this, even though they loved it, because they felt guilty they were cheating their classmates and they were making their classmates look bad. I was like, holy crap. When I grew up in Canada, if I had something like that, I would be in heaven. I would be like in paradise. I would be laughing at my friends. I'm driving in a helicopter or a yacht or a boat or whatever. You're not. I take the selfies and show other people. But my children missed the fact that they weren't studying 12 hours a day with their classmates, and they felt like they were going to get behind. So even though we were on Miami Beach, they were bringing their textbooks. It was shocking. And they were still text messaging. Most of their text messages were to their teacher back in Korea when we were on Miami Beach or on the coast of California. It was shocking. Like, that's another aspect of Guanxi. Yourself is a representative of a group. You are part of a group. You have to manage that group all the time, sometimes more than you just manage yourself. That psychology is really interesting. Do you understand what I was saying?
Yeah, it is really like interesting to me because of course, like I have like I'm not Korean, but yeah, it is really hard for me to understand it because like I wouldn't react the same way as the kids did, but yeah, I understand it. It is really interesting. I went to the library in here and I really, really like it actually. But like for me, for example, I had like moments when I didn't even know what to do because I was there for such a long time. Like it wasn't like I knew everything, but like I don't know. It was really interesting, and like everyone around me was still studying, and then they just like took like 10-20 minute nap on the book, and then they just like woke up and like continued studying.
Right. So you understand why?
Yeah, like that it is about kind of like social status also.
Right. Right. If you are super smart and study for 15 minutes and understand everything for the test, and then you start going outside and playing soccer, what are you doing with the group? You are basically showing everybody else around you is stupid, and your teacher is just too simple. But if you stay studying 12 hours, 20 hours every day, like my kids, when they went through the last year of high school, they would resist having a birthday party, resist having something like Christmas or the national holidays, because their last year of high school, it's not that they just wanted to, but they felt they had to study because of everybody else in their class. It was a requirement. Otherwise, they made the family look bad. They made their classmates look bad. They made their teacher look bad. They made the whole school look bad. And if you're at the school and in the library, you are showing your class is challenging. You're showing that your teacher is a challenging, good teacher, even if you fall asleep. Because if you fall asleep, they just assume you are doing this nonstop, 24 hours a day. And yeah, it's natural. Everybody needs to take a break. So you take a small nap and then you wake up and you keep studying again. So it's natural. Let me explain more about that. When I first came to Korea, Samsung and Hyundai and SK, Daewoo, they would let's say you walk into work in the morning and another guy, work starts. Because you're European, you would think work starts at 9 o'clock, whatever. Well, you realize that work here, you start probably at 7 a.m. because even though the official time is 9 to 5, you have to be there before your boss, and your boss has to be there before his boss, and he has to be there before his boss. So the junior people have to be there basically before the sun comes up, always. And then you're supposed to look good. You're supposed to be looking good for your company. And so what if somebody comes in at 10 a.m., staggering drunk, with maybe a little bit of vomit on his shirt? How would you feel? How do you think that person would be treated? I was shocked when he was treated like Superman.
I guess that like in here, it would be like really a big deal.
He was treated like royalty. They really respected him. They gave him promotions more than other people. Why? Because they just assume that guy is taking the customers or their suppliers or the business partners out to wine and dine and drink, taking care of them nonstop so you can drink nonstop. 24 hours a day drinking is a good characteristic. And so he was doing it right into the night, all through the night, until he starts working the next day. So showing you can drink a lot, or even have an image of drinking a lot, got you promotions faster than people that didn't drink. I was shocked. When we were not recording this, talk to me about some of the time I was consulting in Daewoo and how many of the men would start the morning meetings. And one time a guy was having a birthday party, and he was talking about how he had this great relationship in the morning, and he had this great relationship after breakfast, and he had this great relationship for lunch and dinner, and later that evening, this type of great relationship. You know, what he was talking about, I personally, as a Canadian, was disgusted initially 25 years ago, but everybody else around me in Daewoo were listening and drooling and saying, yeah, wow, congratulations, you're a great guy. I'll let you try to figure out what it was, or ask me when we're not recording, but the relationships, it's definitely complicated. Try to learn why people do what they do and how they do what they do. For example, even the clothes. Why are some people driving around in a fancy car with a Louis Vuitton bag if they talk about how they can't afford going to visit you in Europe? You know, that type of situation. How do they build up? There's a variety of ways that this Guanxi and relationships build up. You need to be a member of groups. You should be a member of a definite lineage or a clan or a social group. And you should understand that there's the Samsung group, different than the Hyundai group, different than the SK, LG. They're all very different. And most of those people can associate themselves with being from a certain, traditionally from a certain province of the country, and from a group of universities, you're a university member, and then the frame. You are part of an institution. You're part of a university. There's a variety of different ways that works. Have you ever asked a Korean person, who are they? Increasingly, it's starting to change. But for a long time, the first few words they would say is, I am a member of this group. Whether I'm a member of this company or I'm a member of this school, that's how they introduce themselves. Is that how you introduce yourself in your home country?
No, not at all.
Where are you from, by the way? I think I heard Europe, but I didn't hear the country. Was that
Yeah, the Czech Republic.
Czech Republic? Okay. So does anybody really promote your own school or those details? Have you heard what
No,
schools
not really.
in Korea are the
I mean,
best?
of
Go
course,
ahead.
they have it like in LinkedIn.
Oh, okay, that's so that they do in other areas, but Guanxi's
I think
super
that the
important.
Seoul National University.
Yes, Seoul National is supposed to be the number one. And number two and number three, have you heard of Sky?
No, I know that like Chang'an should be pretty high, but I want to
Nope.
like apply
Traditionally, no,
there. It was
for easily 20 or 30 years, they were saying that the Seoul National, Yonsei University, Korea University, that Seoul National S, Yonsei University Y, Korea University K, SKY, the Sky Club or the Sky Group, showing that they are up in the sky close to heaven. They are the untouchables. That has only started to change recently after Samsung has basically taken over a university. Now Samsung has a university. Samsung has the Sungguan University and other universities in 2021, 2022. They are building on their own merits, but still that Sky University image is incredibly important. For example, a young girl that comes home one day and says, Mom, Dad, I'm going to get married to a guy from the Sky Universities. You don't even need to say anything else about the guy. The family, usually the mother and father, would be very proud. Oh, congratulations, honey. I was like, what? I don't care what university they went to. Are they a good person? Are they a criminal or not? But in Korea, that image is incredibly important. So your kinship means your family relationship. And you must also know how many Parks are in the family, are in the country, how many Kims are in the country, how many Lees are in the country, how many Jungs are in the country. Those are incredibly important. And some people say some names are more powerful than other names. And if you're part of the original name, you do know that, some Parks may have 50 different levels of cousins and distant relatives that are all still part of the same family name. If you are part of the original family name from that original geography, you are very high status. And then there's the location, the geography. If you're from the geography of the country where the royalty came from or where the chaebol started, that's very important. That could get you an advantage in an interview over somebody that's from a not successful geographical area of the country. And then you have the relationship with your coworkers. You're part of this coworker, you're part of these other coworkers. If somebody is a superstar and you're working with them, that is a good thing. If you're a classmate with somebody or the teacher student, those details are very important here. Some people say Chinese Guanxi construction can be characterized as ego-centered, but I think most people, when you say your ego is too big, they don't really understand the relationships here. For example, some people have to act big just if they're part of that Samsung group or the top organizational group. If you act very low level, very humble, you may be embarrassing your group. So this idea of Guanxi, it gets pretty interesting, really, really interesting. And it goes through bureaucracy and the individuals. The idea of some people are saying there's the market town behavior. There's a lot of things that go behind it. You can see in this diagram I'm showing, if you gain face and you repay favors, then you can start setting up new Guanxi. And then do you have an impersonal relationship, just somebody that is a distant associate to your school? You should be fair with them. But if you have a mixed relationship, it's different. If you have an emotional relationship, if they're part of the family, you have to treat them differently. So all of that decides on how you manage the Guanxi and the face. So hopefully now you understand face. It's not just your cheeks and your nose and your eyebrows, but how you wear your makeup is, how you appear to others is. Anyway, maybe I'm talking too much about this. Our class is a review of many things. If you have questions, let me know. What about the idea of the Chinese backgrounds? Are you aware of where overseas Chinese basically came from and how they had to treat themselves and how they had to act? For example, the idea of there was the final collapse of the Qing dynasty in China which is a long time ago, it made for an exodus of many Chinese people going to other countries in the 19th century. There was another exodus in the 1930s, 1940s, when China suffered from internal turmoil and the Japanese invasion, the Civil War, and stuff like that. Earlier periods, there was the overseas Chinese population, especially they would start in Southeast Asia. And it was Sino-centric views or CBAN views. In the mid-18th centuries, a number of Chinese immigrants began to increase, but they were generally refugees. There was farmers, merchants, artisans. They started going abroad, and the Chinese were starting to, they were being imported or kidnapped or smuggled into other regions just as cheap workers because they were starving initially back in China. So they started going abroad, even though they still had these relationships. So why did they move abroad? Why did they immigrate? A major reason is because inside China was super hard. People were starving and dying. And then we start thinking if the Chinese came to Southeast Asia, not just as traders, but as laborers to get a better opportunity. And so we start understanding that. And where Chinese first started going to was around China, where they could walk to. And so they were going into Indonesia, Malaysia, Philippines, Thailand. So last class, we were talking a little bit about that, but I didn't really spell it out. And so I'm trying to summarize the background of Chinese when they're growing up. In Indonesia, for example, the traditional Muslim-based Indonesian government generally had a series of discriminating against foreigners. They were expelling and murdering non-Indonesian people. You heard that Korea was similar, right? I believe Korea had 500 years of Korean history where if you were non-Korean found here, you would be killed. Like you were not allowed in. Like they call it the Hermit Kingdom in some sense because they didn't allow other people in or out. It generally changed with Suharto that started to help the ethnic Chinese grow. And when the Chinese started to come in, they started working with the heavy industry, but then they eventually started getting financial, because it's not just one Chinese person you're working with, you would be connected. Even if you hire that one Chinese person, that person would be connected to many schools or companies or families in complete different provinces of or states of China. So he could use his relative to get anything from China into help in Indonesia. So they started to become financiers, and they're helping finance the military in Indonesia. Why? They were doing it because the military could provide them protection, and they could provide the licenses because the military generally controls the country and the government. And so the Chinese figured out who was the hierarchical leader and promoted and protect them, starting with protecting and helping the military do anything that my relatives could do. If my relative has a factory, I get the factory products at a very low cost to help the military. And then we could get extra help with that, and licenses, credit monopolies, etc. And then they continued to do that to develop foreign capital and joint ventures. Initially, in the Philippines, the cheap laborers, the Chinese cheap laborers, they were there to benefit the Spanish governments that were controlling the Philippines. And then the Chinese laborers, they moved from just being cheap laborers into these networks, the Guanxi, that would get connected with government and military and power. So you start with any jobs, and you have maybe thousands of Chinese all throughout the country working anywhere, but they're always talking to each other and they're always connected. They're always part of that same Chinese family. So if one person did well, he would do anything he could to bring these other people into that good environment. And so they would work anywhere and find out the military was the most powerful. And so that one Chinese person working with the military would end up sucking in or bringing in or inviting in all other Chinese workers from the low value areas to help. And the same thing happened with the Philippines. There was several different measures. Eventually, the Philippines government and Indonesian government had to control this because the Chinese started growing so powerful. Philippines government, they started to make measures to prevent Chinese from acquiring more economic power because they started getting so much power, and they started to prevent Chinese from getting citizenship. For example, they would prohibit alien Chinese commercial activities by making it very complicated to get immigration. When I came to Korea 25 years ago, going to the immigration office was almost considered like going to prison. You're going to visit and go through a torture chamber. Immigration it's famous. I think it's still kind of famous in some areas for being really, really bad to foreigners. And even the Chinese people are treated in a different floor, in a different area of immigration sometimes. So despite all those hardships, many studies are showing that the Filipino Chinese owned a lot, more than 33% of the top manufacturing firms, 43% of the top commercial firms. Malaysia, same thing. Chinese in Malaysia have a very larger proportion because they're more part of the society, but there's very limited direct access to power. There's a lot of racial discrimination that's very intense in Malaysia. There's a lot of Chinese, but in Malaysia, it's almost impossible for anybody outside that ethnic minority Malaysians to become elected as a government official. However, the Chinese influence grew. 60% of the economy was controlled by those Chinese. Thailand. Almost everybody knows that Thailand's a great tourist area. Have you ever thought why? It started back a long time ago with the Chinese coming in. Thailand was one of the only countries which was not hostile to the Chinese, opposite of Indonesia and Malaysia. So by being friendly, allowing them to come in, some people are talking about how the leaders of Thailand have some Chinese blood in them. So there's full-fledged members of Thai society. They're allowed these foreign immigrants there. This development of the Thailand policies was interesting. They were limiting the introduction of foreign banks and preventing those already there from building branches or domestic branches. So once they got power, then they controlled the government. So they made new laws preventing anybody else from coming in and changing that. And so ultimately what I'm trying to say, like even in North America, the Chinese that went to North America first, they were usually the slave type people that built the railroads. And so those characteristics bind them together. And that's part of the Guanxi. They lived in very harsh environments, not friendly environments. There was a response to the discrimination against the Chinese. And the Chinese had to follow the principle of caution and hedging your bets, avoid publicity, because if you showed off you were Chinese, maybe the Indonesian or Malaysian people would kick you out, or if you were very powerful, the local society would be jealous of you and kick you out. Like in Vietnam, a lot of Vietnamese people may not like Chinese, and if you ask them why, many times they will give you answers that seem kind of strange. Maybe you don't understand it. Maybe it doesn't make sense what they're saying. And then eventually that person's talking might not really understand it. They'll just say that, oh, it's because of this. And it comes back to history. The powerful people are supposed to be our people, the local native people from that country. And once you start seeing people from outside our local area controlling things, they start getting jealous or having problems with it. Once they start identifying that Chinese are owning most of the property around, they start saying that no more Chinese can come in. So this initial hardship of migrating has cultivated values for economic survival, such as they have to be pragmatic, and they have to have a hard work ethic, and they have to look like they're humble and be thrifty, like don't waste money, because number one, you need to help not just you grow, but help everybody in your family, everybody in your community, everybody in your province, everybody in your country that's initially starving in China to grow. And since you are that outsider coming into an area, if you start showing off your number one, or you're super rich, richer than the locals will kick you out. So the next time you look at Chinese compared to somebody from New York City or LA, now you understand why the Chinese act more humble in general, historically, than somebody like Donald Trump, right? When was the last time you heard the Chinese government promoting the fact that they're doing something as much as Donald Trump? It's not just an individual that makes his own personality. It's a community. And ultimately, a very small percent of each country is Chinese, but they own traditionally, historically, a crazy high amount of the wealth. Even the number of billionaires. Like this is new research here. This brown research on the side, that's over 10 years old, but this is just from 2020 over here. The number of billionaires in Thailand, 31 billionaires. However, the ethnic Chinese in Thailand, number of billionaires, if you have 20 of them are basically ethnic Chinese, and 70% of the wealth that they have is ethnic Chinese based. So I'm talking too much. I'm getting a little bit excited. Did you have any questions about that? Are you aware of how you can grow and benefit from these details yourself?
Yeah, it is also really interesting to me. So I just really like to listen. I would ask a question if I would have any, but it is just really interesting to me. So I like to just listen.
How about a hard question? You can see on the side, there's many different charts I can show you. I'm not going to go through all of them, but an interesting challenge was, this is 2021, 2022, we're in right now. And you are from Eastern Europe, I'm from Canada. If we were to vote in our company, whatever company you're in, if you're going to send somebody to manage and grow your Chinese operation, you have a choice. You have somebody from your hometown that you grew up with, or basically anybody from your country that you think is really good, or you could have an ethnic Chinese person, who would you send to manage the operations in China? A lot of Canadians, like myself, would initially think that. Sorry, I didn't hear you. Your internet cut out. Are you still there?
Yeah, I was just saying that I would probably send the Chinese person because they could have like connections and they also know the language and stuff. So.
Right. But now, do you understand how important loyalty is in Southeast Asia and in China or in Korea? I'm just going to tell you, loyalty is very important here, much more important than it is in Canada and North America and probably in Europe. So how would that impact? Generally, Western multinationals, they often assign overseas Chinese, like a Chinese American, a Chinese Canadian, a Chinese Czech manager, this overseas Chinese expat manager, to go and manage details in China, believing their cultural connection or the cultural distance is better for them than some other Western person. And so it makes the former adjust, these Canadian, Chinese Canadians can adjust easier than just a regular Irish Canadian or French Canadian. However, research shows the opposite. Overseas Chinese expats in China and in Korea encounter crazy amounts of adjustment problems, much more than Westerners. Have you ever talked to a European or a Czech Korean here, or a Korean American, Korean Canadian in Korea? A lot of them, especially 10 years ago, 20 years ago, even though they can speak the language, they would be treated like almost crooks. Even if they're like a priest and a very, very good guy, they would be treated really, really bad. Why? Because the locals often thought of them as not being loyal. They abandoned us. They were a traitor. And now they're going to take our, products and take our money or take our girls or take our valuables and send it to some other traitorous country. So a lot of the Chinese European, Chinese Americans that were going to work in China, yes, they may understand more of the values. Yes, they may understand more of the language, but they were criticized a lot. And the locals had a harder time accepting these traitors than they did working with just a regular Western person that's supposedly coming from a developed area. So the Western expats, you understand what expat means? It's like a person from one country working in a different country. That is an expat. You're outside your patriotic nation. So the Western expats and the overseas Chinese on assignment in China responded very differently to surveys. The results showed that although Chinese expats have a lower degree of cultural novelty than the Westerners, the overseas Chinese were generally less well adjusted than the Westerners, especially with regard to the work adjustment. So I've talked nonstop all class. But I hope you appreciate the idea of Guanxi, the idea of Sun Tzu Art of War, the idea of the background and why Chinese management is a certain way, why the Korean management has a certain reasoning behind it. The more you understand it, the easier it may be for you to fit in and be successful in these areas. Any questions?
No questions. It was really interesting. I in general, I find this class really interesting because I feel like, for example,
are you just doing that? Are you doing the Guanxi thing and just trying to say, "Oh, thank you very much, teacher. Thank you, God, teacher," because I'm Canadian, but I still like to hear it. Keep going.
I really like reading books, and The Art of War is actually one of the books that I want to read. And I feel like back home that teachers are just using textbooks that are many times not interesting, and that I don't know, it's just not my style. So I really appreciated your teaching actually with things that we can like actually use in real life and that are actually useful.
I have been working internationally. I've worked with 128 different countries. I've been working, I came to Korea in 1995, initially working with like Samsung, Daewoo, the government. I've had incredible opportunities. So why the heck aren't you using those opportunities? Why aren't you using me? Why are you just sitting there half asleep when I'm right in front of you and you could use my connections and stuff like that? Ask connections. Tell me you want to learn about this or do this. When I first came to Kim Young University, I used my connections in Samsung and I taught the course while I am the teacher. I had 3 other teachers teaching it with me. So I told all students, thank you for joining this class. I will be your main teacher, but you have 3 other teachers and you have another teacher from here, another teacher from here, and another teacher from here, all for you, every class, all class long. And those first 3 other teachers, those are very senior executives from Samsung. And another teacher is from Denmark. Another teacher is from Vietnam. Another teacher is from Romania. And yet the students, even though the senior executives of Samsung were in the class, almost every class, offering internships, the students in our program, even though I had more than 100 students, only 2 asked them questions and took up the opportunity for this internship. And that's one of the Samsung executives. He offered those students 500 free high-tech devices from Samsung to continue doing the project. And the students said no. As soon as class finished, they finished with it. They didn't care. I was like, so I stopped bringing in these other executives and teachers to class. If you want it, talk to me and I could probably introduce you to these people again. Don't stay quiet. Tell the world where you want to move, and I'd be happy to help you with that. Anyway, I talk too much. Develop your Guanxi. Develop your connections. Develop yourself. You know that there's not only these videos of us teaching these classes, but there's videos of me teaching this information from many years ago that you can work with too, right?
Yeah.
Okay. You said you liked reading the textbook. You know how in today's class, I was showing some of this. This is a page from the textbook, which is right here. Oops, no, right here. So this is talking about face, talking about Renqing and the social capital of Guanxi. This is page 46 of the textbook. And this whole textbook I already have. And if you want to take a look at it sometime, you're welcome to do research and share these details. Of course, I have to respect international intellectual property rights. But if you want to do research on some of these material, you can look over my shoulder and take a look at this sometime.